up with like an A&R that I knew at another label, and he actually had signed a deal with another label, and they were kind of keeping him, I guess, white labeled. Maybe that's the term. I don't know, but where they basically didn't announce that they had signed him. And one of the reasons for getting signed to this label, it was a major label, was, to use that as a catapult. So he signed, and then all of a sudden he was running into all these issues, and things kind of fell apart over the next few months. So I felt bad. Like, it was cool. It was like, oh man, I could help connect those dots for him. But then it all fell through, and I'm like, shit, I wish it wasn't that way. And then maybe a month after that, he was still doing good. He was doing like these big radio runs all over the nation. And radio at that time, it was kind of dying, not where it is now, but it was definitely on down. So he was trying to figure it out too. And then like that crazy incident happened where, in the Walmart, where, the person got shot or whatever. And it was like right at that time, I don't know if he had just signed a deal with with Interscope, or if it was right after, but it was probably within the same like month, like a 30-day time span. I think he had signed a new deal with Interscope early on. And that happened. And it was like, it catapulted everything. And it sucks that it's like, it takes a situation like that, but at the same time,
what exactly happened in the Walmart? I'm sorry that I'm not sure.
Somebody, it's hazy. I mean, they did an investigation. They have cameras on it, but I guess somebody approached him in the Walmart because he had some local notoriety, and some guys, they were younger, but they got aggressive with him, and one of them had a gun, and DaBaby, John had a gun on him too, and I guess John was just quicker, and he shot the kid, the guy, and killed him. I say kid. I can't remember if he was 17 or 19, but definitely a young man, and
right. Wow.
And yeah, so after he got shot, like it kind of it took off. His career took off. And it sucks because it was like one of those things that maybe from a street perspective is what validated it, or validated him in the eyes of this machine that wants you, to do this or whatever, but he was also talented. He was an extremely hard worker. He's very, very smart, and he was very fair. He always made sure I got paid. Communicated really well, so I'm not just going to say like that was the reason why it took off, but it was kind of like that pivotal moment. And then when that happened,
it was enough of a thing in the culture to kind of do the last push,
Yeah, and
that might have happened a year later anyways, but
for sure, who knows? With him for sure, it would have got to that point because he was hustling, he was making adjustments, he was meeting the people he needed to meet, he was paying the people he needed to pay when he needed to pay him. And I know like in image is one thing, but like I know him, like he's used to sit in my house while we mix records, and he'd play with my kids and stuff like that. And when he'd come to the studio later on, he'd bring his daughter, like he's a great dad. And all those things aside, he changed my life, and the situation changed my life. And he's a really, in my eyes, in any situation I've ever been with him in, he's a good person, a really good person. So,
yeah.
And I know there's other things that happen and things that, more infamous type things, but that's my experience with him over these past 7 years.
Wow. So
anyways, and that kind of leads us to where we're at now.
Mixing records.
That's right. Now we're mixing records. Well, I was always mixing records, but
that's a crazy story, dude. Yeah, that was wow. It's just like you went through every single like kind of working class struggle to kind of get to the to just put in enough reps and have the right opportunities meet you at the right time, and then eventually like work with the right artist who broke out,
right.
It was, and I'm curious. You kind of mentioned like you kind of you kept at the drumline thing for 10 years until you burnt out, and then you just kept at the audio thing for like 15 years. What kept you so motivated? What was that thing that kept you, left you having your eye on the prize this whole time throughout all the struggles and all the things?
Leading up to that, it was validation, I think. I think, diving way back down into it, what I initially said about, and I was, not that I planned on talking about this, but, growing up at the mall, I didn't realize it, but I was always looking for something, for some sort of acceptance. And not saying that my parents were good parents, they loved me, but a lot of times I was kind of left like, Kevin's cool, he'll be all right, we'll put him on his own. And so there was always this need for me to be the best version I could possibly be so that people would accept me.
Yeah.
And not that I needed that type of validation for people to accept me because they accepted me. I just didn't realize it. And still to this day, like I just don't think I'm good enough at anything. And that's what kind of drives me. And I'm like, well, maybe if I just was a little bit better at this, maybe one more plaque, maybe this, maybe that, or maybe if I get a little bit better at drumming, then but the whole time there's this whole group of people, of friends and family that love me and care about me, and I'm like, well, maybe if I do a little bit better, I'll be good enough for them. And that kind of always drove me.
Yeah. I totally get it. I'm in a similar boat, man. So I feel you on that one.
Yeah.
The need for feeling validated and accepted, and sometimes people choose careers and don't give up because of that. Because they're. Yeah, I think.
I remember when. So my mom was a nurse educator, and my dad worked for IBM as like a like they had like a conveyor belt system, like an assembly department, but he like managed that. So just middle class. And I remember always feeling like, even to this day, like music isn't good enough. It's not a good enough career. And I remember early on, when I first got a gold record, I wasn't doing the best financially. I was still like thugging it out, trying to figure out what was going on. And I was like, Mom, look, I got a gold record, and she's like, did you get paid more money for that? And it's like, I never felt like anybody ever was excited. Like I never felt like my family like really was excited that I was a really good drummer. And I never felt like they were really excited that I was doing these big things in the music industry. And I remember my sister, she skated, and then she was on the rowing team at UNC Chapel Hill. She was a coxswain. And my mom went to every one of her meets, even like most of the ones that were away, but all the home ones, for 4 years of college. And I remember like she only came to like a couple of the games that I ever played in band. And like, so all these things, I never gave it too much thought, but like when I got older and like I really was diving deep, like, why am I this way? I'm like, well, I'm seeking this validation. And that is one of the things that motivated me. And, I love my mom. We have a great relationship. Everything's cool. But I think subconsciously it was like, maybe if I just do this a little bit better, then they'll want to come to my game. Or I do it a little bit better, they'll get excited about, the gold or platinum records or whatever. And I think it wasn't until my mom was, she was teaching a class and someone asked what I did, or she talks about me sometimes, or, because she'll talk about me when I'm a little kid and give an example of like, I choked or I fell and hurt my knee or something. And they're like, oh, how old's your son? What does he do? And she said what I did and mentioned who I worked for. And she said like the class freaked out. And they're like, oh, your son really works for that? And she's like, I didn't realize like you actually do this like that, And I'm like, yeah, like I didn't realize it either, but yes,
yeah.
And so, and that was cool. Like that was a validating moment, but that was kind of, I feel like that's really what's always kind of driven me.
Yeah.
And,
wow.
and, I wish it was like more sugar coated or something like that. But I think it's, an acceptance thing for me.
But you must also love it, right?
Oh yeah. Well, no, I was super into it. Like I would research about it. Like I wanted to know about like, different types of harmonics, like how they were going to sound second order, third order, things like that. I really dove deep into it, but I also kind of hit a plateau on the learning side of it, because the only place to go farther was like more into like almost electrical engineering, looking at, getting into building stuff and stuff like that. And I wasn't super interested in that. So the hobby side of it is now it's more of a job. It's a cool job, but it's still a job.
Right. Yeah. We got bills to pay, and
that's right.
Totally. So, yeah, man. Where do I begin? Let's kind of move into like the work process. How you work with artists, and like we'll get into your approach to mixing and stuff. But now that you've found some success with some success, like we're talking about 5 billion streams. Now that you've found success, do you kind of have like a vetting process to kind of see like who's an artist you want to work with, or is it just kind of like, well, I mean, I know that you have a website where you offer like, big label mixing to indie artists as well. So I'm assuming that you basically mix everything.
Yep. I'm just work for hire, man. I'm currently working on some things, for the future, like just some different businesses to where I can focus more on doing what I want to do But as of right now, mixing is my job. I don't really have. Early on, I was taught not to focus on if a song is good or bad. I just look at it for what it is. This song,
Right.
That this part, this isn't a good vocal. This is a vocal. This isn't a bad vocal. This isn't a bad drums. These are just drums. And so I pretty much will work with anybody.
Yeah.
Unless it's just really, really far out there and it doesn't make sense. But that's maybe one out of every 100, 200.
Yeah,
records.
yeah.
I don't care. Like I want everybody to have. It's a range. Mixing is about a range. Where is it at, and where can you take it? If
Right.
it starts off bad, I can make it okay. If it starts out okay, I can make it good. If it starts out good, I can make it amazing.
Right.
Like that's.
But someone
the
said
kind of
like you give it like one letter grade higher, right? Like that's like
well, ideally, that's where your value comes in. It's like
Right.
because you're able to do something that they can't do. I can maybe do 2 or 3 letter values higher. And really, if I wanted to put in the effort and they were okay with it, like say if I wanted to do drum replacement and things like that, or all kind of stuff, like I could, and I could probably take it to another level. But at that point too, it's not their record anymore; it's my record, and I've learned that just because I know how to do something, or this is my opinion, and yeah, maybe it's rooted in working on music constantly for the past 15 years, it still doesn't make it right. You know, and it's still
you talked about like letting go of perfection. I think at the beginning of our conversation of like, you said like, I'm not trying to make everything sound perfect. I'm just trying to embrace it for what it is.
Right. Yeah. So you have to separate the ego out of it. I came to that. That's from dealing with labels. So what'll happen is a label will send you a record and they're like, hey, here's the reference. You're like, okay, cool. When you start mixing, you're like, this is going to be the greatest mix that the world has ever known. I'm going to use this reverb and I'm going to do this and this. I'm going to automate this. And they'll come back to be like, yeah, it sounds really good, but it doesn't sound like the reference. Can you make it sound like the reference? And you're like, oh, I just spent 16 hours mixing this record, And it happened over and over and over. And I'm like, yeah, but listen. And they were like, yeah, no, you listen. We are paying you money to do what we want you to do. After maybe, I think that was like the first 5 or 6 label records I did. And after that, I was like, okay, we're going to give them what they want. And when I started giving them what they want, it was easier. And the records still did well. It wasn't like the records weren't doing well. The records did fine. And so I was like, okay, well, my opinion doesn't matter as much as I think it does.
Right.
And I looked at it as not a bad thing. It's not what Kevin wants to do. It's not, this is how Kevin does it. It's, you're providing a service. You're doing this in a way that
it's their record.
It's their record. It's not my record.
Right. Yeah.
And so that was a very, that humbled me those first few months of really starting to get some label work and them not letting me do. And I was like, but I'll show you how good I am. And they're like, we don't care. We already hired you.
There's nothing left to prove.
Yeah, there's nothing left to prove. Now
just do the work.
This is a business. And then so what I learned is I started looking at it like, okay, yeah, this is a business. So let's make this make sense. So I'd figure out, okay, I want to make $200 an hour. Right? That would be like, that's a good number for an industry professional, $200 an hour. Now the thing is, we're not working 40 hours a week all the time. But if I can average $200 an hour on these mixes, then I'm good. So if I have a mix where I'm getting paid $1,000, can I do it in 5 hours? Right? And so you start working on things like workflow, efficiency. You start figuring out what works, what doesn't work. It's not a template thing because you can't use the same everything on every mix. But say you're working on a project and they record it all at the same studio and you've got 8 songs to do and they're very similar. They're not all across the board. They're more of like a static type, just a standard hip hop album. Well, with Pro Tools, you can do saving the preset files. Or saving the track presets. It's like, okay, well, they want this similar sound on a lot of things. Well, I'm going to save this track preset. Then I just save myself 20 minutes figuring out a lead vocal, and I'm going to work off that. So I'm going to work on gain staging into that, to make sure it's not over compressing in areas, or make slide adjustments, But things like that. And then so I got the workflow down to where it was like now it's taking me an hour, 2 hours to mix a record, an industry record. But that's assuming that there's no problems. So another thing too, like for anybody that's out there listening that's a mixer, like you're not a bad mixer. You just are getting shitty stuff. I'm sorry. I didn't. Can we cuss? Is that cool? I mean,
Yeah, go for it, man.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's you're just getting bad stuff.